Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Miller, hopping on live today to talk about curiosity, not just as a personality trait, which I don't know that I would even necessarily consider curiosity to be a personality trait. It's more, I think, an inherent tool that sometimes we stop tapping into, we forget that we have. We'll get more into that in a bit here, but I want to talk about curiosity as a success habit. If you are joining the conversation live today and you have a comment or a question, go ahead and drop it into the chat and I'll circle back to that. And then if you're watching the replay, I invite you to do the same. I always come back to check out any questions and answer them in the comments or comments. I appreciate any input or questions that you might have. I think that curiosity is a success habit. Why? Because it helps us to better understand ourselves and it helps us to better understand others. Curiosity can help us get to the core root issue, the real problem before we move to take action to find a solution. And curiosity can help us make decisions that we feel more aligned with and help us to create connection and ultimately lead more effectively, whether you are leading a team or just leading your own life. And I often like to go back to habits that kids have, because I think kids have a lot of success habits, and that is because they are listening to their instincts before they learn to stop listening to their instincts. So what's one of the things that kids often do when they're trying to understand and make a connection to people and things and the world around them? Well, they ask why, and they don't just ask why once or twice, they ask why continuously. And what I love is that they ask why confidently. They don't have any insecurities about their questions and their curiosities and what that might say about them and how others are perceiving them. No, this is something that we learn as we have experiences and grow in our professional lives. So kids notice things, they ask questions, they say what they're thinking. And what they're doing is seeking to understand. But somewhere along the way, many of us learned to stop. We may have learned that we may have had experiences that created the story that we now tell ourselves that asking too many questions makes us look difficult or appear like we are challenging somebody else's authority. But this habit, getting curious, staying curious, that helps us understand the world as children. What if it is also one of the habits that can help us to become successful as an adult? So that's what I want to explore today, curiosity as a success habit, because it absolutely helps us better understand ourselves, and the better we understand ourselves, well, then the better we can understand others. And how can we solve a problem if we don't understand exactly what's happening? A lot of times we need to go deeper in exploring the emotion, the problem, to be able to ultimately uncover it and then discover a solution. So curiosity starts with getting curious about yourself, understanding so that's where I want to start. Because again, the better we understand ourselves, the better we can understand others. And how can we help our team do something if we haven't first done it ourselves? Again, whether you're leading a team or leading your own life, curiosity is absolutely a success habit that I feel strongly can help. So stay tuned in if you're curious. I think you'll get something out of the conversation. But sometimes if you notice that you are maybe you get an idea, maybe you have a frustration that keeps surfacing. So an uncomfortable emotion, maybe it's a hesitation, maybe something excites you. This is an emotion is what's drawing your attention, what's trying to get your attention. And if you allow yourself to get curious about it, well, that's where the path starts. That's how you can ultimately discover your first step and then take your first step. So curiosity is directional. It's not necessarily giving you the answer, but it's telling you where to look. And that's why it's such a powerful tool. Your curiosity is also stemming from your intuition. It's a feeling. maybe you feel frustrated. Okay, but why do you feel frustrated? How often do we just skip over, move past the feeling and try to continue working on what we have in front of us rather than stopping and taking a moment to actually explore the emotion? So your intuition may not be giving you the answer saying, here's what you need to do, but sometimes it's giving you a question. If you allow it to, if you get curious about what is getting your attention and why. So for example, if you're stalling on a project, well, what's the emotion that you're feeling, and why are you feeling like that? And that can help you discover why you're stalling, which then can help you understand what it is that you need, what's potentially missing. So what keeps getting my attention? For example, why am I hesitating? What am I feeling frustrated about? Well, first, what's the emotion that I'm feeling? And then if it's frustration, okay, but why am I frustrated? And then how long have I been feeling like this? Or why am I'm feeling stuck? Okay, why am I feeling stuck here? And then that can lead you to another question. Well, I feel like I don't have enough information. Okay, well, what information do you need? So curiosity can be such a great problem solver. And I actually wrote about this years ago in my first book, Where's My Mustard? I described 5 steps to overcome a challenge, or if you are overcome a challenge or working toward a goal. And the first step is to acknowledge it. And this is often a step that we skip over because maybe it's uncomfortable, or we have to acknowledging what we want requires us to take some responsibility to ultimately take action. So the first step is to acknowledge the feeling, the idea, the challenge. And then the second is to let it exist and expand. Let yourself start to get curious. That's step number 3. And then step number 4 is get excited about the possibility of creating change. And then step number 5 is to get present. So once you've get present so that you can see the first step. So once you've done the hard work of letting your feeling be there, acknowledging it, and then getting curious about it, letting it guide you, well, then you've stopped sort of fighting what your instincts are trying to tell you. For example, if there's a conversation that you feel like is going to be difficult and you keep putting it off, well, if you allow yourself to pause and get curious about how you're feeling and what's showing up and why, well, when we try to avoid what needs our attention rather than just giving what is trying to get our attention, it's like your brain is doing this little short circuit or tug of war. You can't surface the answer when you're not acknowledging the problem. So that's the fifth step. The fifth step there is to get present. Once you have done the hard work of letting your feeling, letting your goal, letting your problem, letting your idea get your attention, and then you go through the other steps, well, then your first step is going to show up. So it's exciting for me to see that this is something I've been talking about for a long time. Curiosity as a great problem solver, as an inherent tool that we sometimes forget to tap into, because I see it coming up in research a lot when successful leaders talk about traits of successful leaders. Curiosity is one that comes up often. And I talk a lot about, especially in working with my clients, getting the reps in, getting practice reps of how you want to show up the next time in a certain situation, in a challenging dynamic. And the more how it applies here is get the reps in on your own by getting curious about yourself, sitting with the feeling, sitting with the idea, and then taking it multiple layers deeper just by asking yourself why, just like you would have done as a kid. So you already know how to do this. We're curious by nature, but a lot of times we stop that. We halt that our instinct to speak up and ask a question. For example, in a team meeting, okay, I don't really understand why exactly we're doing this. How many of us want to speak up and say that? Maybe a lot of people are thinking that, but it can feel uncomfortable because we don't want to be looked at as not part of the group. We don't want to make waves, but bringing up a question could solve a challenge that could otherwise, if left unaddressed, could lead to weeks of wasted efforts not being aligned in the same direction. That's just one example. But anyhow, the more you practice getting curious about yourself, when you get an idea, when you have an uncomfortable emotion, and you sit with it, you don't have to sit with it for an hour. This process can take just a matter of minutes, and then you can surface your solution. But when we're shutting down our curiosity, we can't surface the solution. So the more you do this in your own life, the more practice you'll have, and the better you'll be able to, the easier it'll be for you to be curious about others. A piece of advice I got from a friend who also happens to be a phenomenal leader years ago was seek to understand. And I hadn't heard that before, and I was not showing up that way. Instead, I was showing up with my own perspective. And this was a fear-based point of view or emotion that was driving my action. I was trying to manage the other person's perception of me. So rather than coming to the conversation seeking to understand what's happening on their end, because we never know what another person is going through. And so when we lead with, well, this is my perspective, this is what I need, it's okay to have needs and perspectives, of course, but we sort of shut down any opportunity to learn about the other person and to better understand them, and then to have connection. And we need that connection. So we miss out on opportunities. And this is something that I was not actively doing. So I took that advice, and it's something that I work to, and it's always a work in progress, but I've gotten much better. And, there's always opportunities to continue to apply what we're learning. But let's say, for example, you have an employee who is not doing something that you need them to do, and you know that you need to address it. And the story you can start to tell yourself is, I have to give negative feedback. This is going to be uncomfortable. This is going to be a difficult conversation. I don't want to do this. Let me just put this off for a bit. Or your approach can be to just come to the conversation with the expectation. But what if you shift your perspective, and instead of approaching the conversation from your perspective, what if you get curious about what you can learn about that individual? So maybe there's a resource that they need that they don't have. Maybe they don't understand why that part of that task that they're required to do is important. Maybe it's something that they struggle with, that they don't have a lot of experience with. So you could connect them with somebody on the team that does have that experience, that could be a resource for them. Maybe they just don't feel motivated around that task because it's not something that they enjoy. But if you approach the conversation as, hey, this is what I noticed, and here's the expectation. Tell me what's happening on your end. Do you have what you need? Or maybe if they're just not motivated around that task, that type of work, okay, what does motivate you? Maybe we can find a way to implement more of what does energize and motivate you into your day-to-day. And then what happens is, when we satisfy what's happening in someone else's world, and we can't have connection without understanding. So when we get curious, then this helps to create understanding. And back to the earlier example that I shared, when I was approaching the situation, the conversation with my perspective, and my friend gave me the advice, seek to understand, which I'm sure is one of the reasons why he's such a great leader. That was pretty eye-opening to me. And I was coming from a place of fear. So when we're going into a conversation, a situation that's potentially challenging, where we don't know the outcome, we want to control the outcome because we don't know it. So there can be some fear around there. But if we can, a great way to step outside of ourselves, get outside of our heads, and to get present, is to get curious. And that's the way that you can create connection in interviews too. If you're feeling nervous in an interview, you can look at it as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to share about yourself, but also an opportunity to learn about the other person. And then that brings you present. Curiosity creates connection. Another example, I was working with a leadership coaching client, and he shared with me that there was a senior leader that he didn't feel comfortable around. He didn't feel his most confident around, because he felt like that senior leader had a perception that he wasn't very confident and didn't he just felt like he didn't respect him very much, and didn't think he was capable and confident. Well, that's not a good feeling. Whenever we feel like somebody doesn't feel like we're capable or competent or doesn't respect us, well, then we can start to question ourselves. We can start to feel, nervous around them, and we can end up fulfilling that prophecy and end up coming across like we're not confident or competent. So I encouraged my client to take a step back and approach the conversation from a place of curiosity. So I encouraged him to think of something, imagine himself in that senior leader's world, and to get curious about what that senior leader might know that he could learn from him. What's one thing that he could teach you? Is there a question that you can ask that you genuinely want to know the answer to open up conversation? And we love to share, we love to teach, we love to talk about ourselves. So then this creates an opportunity for connection, for my coaching client to connect with the leader, and then potentially change the leader's perception of him. So the key, though, in a situation like this is you definitely want to get curious about what you really want to know, and then ask a question that you genuinely want to know the answer to, because otherwise, it won't be received very well. But it also set you at ease. If you're asking a question you genuinely want to know the answer to, that takes the pressure off of you and invites the other person to share about themselves. And so we can get curious about ourselves, get curious about others. And this also translates to your customers. I was listening to some of Joe Licata's podcast over the weekend. He is the founder of RepPath, helping aspiring medical sales reps move into medical sales, and also current medical sales reps become better at their roles. And one of the traits that he talked about with top performing sales reps is curiosity. And actually, he's going to join me on next week's Empower Hour. So we're going to be talking about the skills that help you get the job, don't necessarily help you get promoted. Curiosity is one of the things that we're going to be moving deeper into. Definitely recommend checking out the RepPath podcast and Joe Licata's channel. But for example, you can't solve a customer's challenge if you don't understand what it actually is. So in one of his podcasts, he was talking about how he was comparing it to a sports analogy, which I don't follow sports, but I understand, of course, the analogy. He said 4 passes, make 4 passes. There's it was either in a movie or a coach, make 4 passes before you shoot. So ask 4 questions before you talk about your product. So what if there's a difficult conversation that you're heading into, or someone that you just feel maybe not your most confident and comfortable around? What are 4 questions you can ask them before you start sharing about yourself? I was working with a leader a while back, and he was stuck in he was having a challenge in his hiring process. He was stalled in the process. And when we have a problem, a problem that feels high stakes, the inclination can be to take action, to move, to solve the problem quickly. But when we try to move into action without having enough information, well, then sometimes we're not moving in the right direction. So what I did was I asked him questions to help. I slowed him down and asked deeper questions to get to the root issue, to understand, what was holding him back. And then from there, he was able to start moving forward and make progress. So curiosity helps you uncover the root issue, but a lot of times we don't let ourselves sit with the uncomfortable feeling long enough to get to that root issue. So then how can we discover a solution? And I've been talking a lot lately about self-determination theory, and the curiosity piece relates to that as well. So self-determination theory talks about 3 things that we need in order to feel motivated. So we need autonomy, we need agency over our work, we need to feel competent and capable in our ability to achieve, and we need to feel connected. We need relatedness to the people around us. And so your team wants to feel this, and asking people questions about about them and learning about them can help you understand what they need to feel connected. So before trying to solve a problem for someone, we want to surface the problem so that we can understand exactly what it is. And we do that by asking questions. And a great place to start is starting with yourself, getting curious about yourself. A lot of times we judge our own feelings, our own challenges before we give ourselves, rather than just letting the problem, the uncomfortable emotion exist and expand and get curious about what's going on. So the better you can do that for yourself, the better you can do that for others. So for example, if you're coming away from a situation that didn't produce the outcome that you had hoped, rather than judging yourself harshly on, I failed here, well, get curious about what happened there, and then go deeper. Ask yourself additional questions, and then you'll be able to take more different aligned action moving forward. Or if you're feeling frustrated with someone, rather than making an assumption about what's going on with them, put yourself come to the conversation with a different perspective, seeking to understand what's going on with them. If you're in a situation where you have to give some feedback that's potentially going to be a bit challenging, well, if you start the conversation with the 4 passes, the 4 questions, seeking to understand, you're more likely to lower the person's defenses, and then they may be more open to receive the feedback. And then you've created a connection. So curiosity helps us with so many things. It helps us understand before we try to solve with ourselves problems that we're experiencing, problems that our customers or our team may be having. And our colleagues as well. Before we try to influence, we want to seek to understand. So I want to leave you with a curiosity challenge this week. See if you can notice if there's one place that you're making an assumption, and if you can replace that assumption with a question. It sounds very simple. The idea that curiosity is such a great tool and problem solver and way to establish connection, but we can forget about it sometimes. So I wanted to bring it back up today, also because it's coming up in a lot of the conversations I'm having and listening to with and about leaders and leadership. And the first place to start to be an influential, impactful leader is self leadership. So I invite you to get curious about yourself, ideas, emotions that are coming up, frustrations. Go deeper, and it just takes a matter of minutes. So start with yourself, and then you can carry it over to your team. And if this is something that you're navigating in your role or with your team, and you want to talk more about it and maybe explore one-on-one coaching and or a workshop with your team, you're welcome to reach out. My email is amy@amyleemiller.com, and website is here on the screen there. So you can also reach me there. And I'll see you next week. And I'll be back with Joe Licata next week. So that was going to be a fun conversation. And I'll post that shortly so you can stay connected there.